Greetings to our constituents, to all of our fellow Floridians, and also to all Americans across this great land. I'm Congressional Representative West, and I invite you once again to our weekly video update. And I appreciate you taking the time to look at this update and share it with friends of yours. You know, this past week we had a great event. It's been a little over 10 years since we've had the Fort Lauderdale Chamber of Commerce conduct a fly-in here to Washington, D.C. And we were able to bring in 75 members of the Fort Lauderdale Chamber this past week to come up and see what is happening here at Capitol Hill. They had the opportunity to meet with people such as the Israeli ambassador to the United States, Honorable Michael Oren. They had a great tour of the Pentagon. They were hosted by the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army, General Corelli. And then they also had the time up here on Capitol Hill to meet a lot of our colleagues, some from the other side of the aisle as well, to talk about their concerns in different parts of the legislation. And then we had another great event where we went over to the Embassy of Chile and we met with the ambassador there, and we had an opportunity to talk about extending the economic and trade opportunities between South Florida, Fort Lauderdale area, Port Everglades, and the country of Chile. And that is what we have to do up here in Washington, D.C., understanding that the means that we can turn around this economy is for us here as legislators to set the conditions with the right type of tax, regulatory policies, trade policies, monetary fiscal policies that will ensure that this economy can grow once again. You know, a lot of people were very happy about the 2.5% GDP growth we had in the last quarter, but that comes on the heels of 0.4% and 1.0%. And hopefully they do not revise down that number of 2.5%. But we need to have GDP growth that is at least at 3.5 or even higher so that we can turn this economy around. And speaking of which, one of the big concerns that we have with the Chamber coming up here, and one of the concerns I continue to have as being a member of the Small Business Committee, is our regulatory environment. So I'd like to take a moment to share with you some statistics on the regulatory numbers for 2011. It's been 283 days since the President delivered his executive order on regulations and the fact that he wanted to see them reduced. It's been 109 days since the President delivered that executive order on regulations for independent agencies. But in this year, we've only had one regulation, one rule that's been rescinded, and that was to look and reclassify spilled milk not as an oil spill. There have been 508 rules that have been deemed significant under Executive Order 12866. However, the cost of the regulatory burden that we are imposing upon our free market for enterprise, our private sector, $84.8 billion. The number of new pages of regulations that have been added into this year, 2011, 67,036 new pages of regulations. And the hours of annual paperwork that will be required to take care of that burden, 88.2 million man hours. We're going in the wrong direction. And there does have to exist some type of regulation out there, but when we have this uber regulatory environment that's emanating out of Washington, D.C., that once again provides that uncertainty. That once again creates that sense of lack of confidence in what we are doing here in Washington, D.C., and it precludes our small business owners especially from expanding and growing their businesses because they're just not able to keep up with a lot of these regulations. Another key thing that I'm concerned about is as we get closer to the super committee making their decisions, which I do hope they knuckle down and find the right cuts and spending up here in Washington, D.C., which is not really that hard. Defense sequestration is a big concern. This past week we had all of the service chiefs testify before the House Armed Services Committee about the ramifications if we have another $500 to $600 billion of cuts come down on our Defense Department. And we have already instituted about $460 to $470 billion of cuts to the Defense Department over the next 10 years. When I think about my brothers and sisters still out there in uniform, to include my own nephew, those men and women and their families cannot be considered to be the bill payers for the fiscal irresponsibility that is emanated out of Washington, D.C., especially when we continue to ask them to do more and more, and now we're talking about giving them less and less. The world is an even more dangerous environment. The recent decision to pull all of our troops out of Iraq is definitely giving Iran a green light. And when you consider what is happening in Syria, when you understand that Hezbollah pretty much controls Lebanon, the relationship that Iran already has with Hamas and the Gaza Strip, the deteriorating situation in Egypt, and now we hear that in Benghazi, the Al-Qaeda flag is flying there in Libya. This is not the time for us to start talking about decimating our military. And if we cannot get away from this typical peak and valley mentality we have with our military, find that steady state to make sure that we can protect our interests, protect our country, and protect our allies. Most importantly, our staunchest ally in the Middle East, Israel. So we cannot afford to have this defense sequestration kick in. And we will continue to do what is necessary to advocate for that super committee to do their job and find the requisite number of spending cuts between 1.2 to 1.5, and they should even go higher, as Simpson and Bowles testified this past week before them. The last thing a couple things I want to talk about is very simple. I want to offer congratulations to Lane University. Our office was very successful in putting together the packet to recommend Lane University of Boca Raton to host a presidential debate. And this week, it was decided that Lane University would host the final and decisive debate there on their campus at the Wool Performing Arts Center in Boca Raton. Congratulations to Mayor Susan Welchel as well, the mayor of Boca Raton, because I know they're going to roll out the red carpet to host the world as we do have that presidential debate there in Florida, which is a key and important state. You know, it was a year ago this week that we celebrated in Boca Raton our victory, which enables me to sit here today as your congressional representative. Truly a privilege and an honor of immense proportions, and words can never express that. But this is not over. As we get ready to go into the 2012 election season, I want to once again talk to you all about a very good book that I think you should read. It's Mark Levin's book, Liberty and Tyranny, because I believe that this is the ultimate decision that Americans will have to make in 2012. A decision between liberty, as we understand it, freedom and democracy, or the tyranny of a bureaucratic nanny state that really does believe that they can run your life from cradle to grave. And with that being said, I'd like to close with a quote from Abraham Lincoln, 1864. "We all declare for liberty, but in using the same word, we do not all mean the same thing. With some, the word liberty may mean for each man to do as he pleases with himself and the product of his labor, while with others, the same word may mean for some men to do as they please with other men and the product of other men's labor. Here are two, not only different, but incompatible things, called by the same name, liberty. And it follows that each of these things is, by the respective parties, called by two different and incompatible names, liberty and tyranny." That is the decision that we have to make. And that's why this book by Mark Levin is a preeminent book for each and every one of us that believes in the foundational principles and values of this great nation, to read, to study, to understand, and to be able to articulate what it means to live in this great land where we are free, freedom of our will, freedom of our conscience. But if we are not careful, there will be those men that will enslave our freedoms, enslave our abilities to create that wealth, because they believe that they can create wealth from up here. They will enslave that entrepreneurial spirit that's made this country the greatest nation that the world has ever known. Because as Abraham Lincoln also said, you cannot make a poor man rich by making a rich man poor. America is not about class, it is not about caste, because I sit here as a testimony to the greatness and exceptionalism of this nation, being born and raised in the inner city of Atlanta, Georgia. Because in America, where you were born and where you come from does not determine your station later on in life. But if we have people that continue to profess that, we have people that continue to try to divide that based upon one simple thing, our ability to achieve and find success, then the greatest days of America will not be ahead of us. But I believe a year from now, we will make the right decision between liberty and tyranny. And I'm honored that there in Boca Raton at Lane University, we will have those two very distinct and incompatible things contrasted for us to all make the right decision. God bless you all, and God keep you. Steadfast and loyal.